Okay, good morning again. My name is William Morgan with Capital Management Group of the Carolinas. This is the 10th year that we have hosted a senior financial forum, and it's difficult to change it up. I see a lot of familiar faces, people that have been here before, and it's difficult to try to find things that would be different than maybe what you've heard before. Of course, you know, a lot of things continually change. The investment world continues to change. Taxes, as you'll see on the agenda, Ted Budd, our congressman, will be here at 10:15 to talk about issues that are affecting seniors, legislative issues in Washington that you should be aware of. Randy Cass from the Sheriff's Office will be here. There has been a rash lately of scams and fraud. We've been subject to it. I've been subject to it. And some things to look out for, some things to pay attention to. And then finally, Will Long from Pope McMillan Law Firm will talk about estate planning. Too often in the financial planning world, people overlook, you're so concerned with accumulating assets and then creating income and spending those assets that you forget that you need to figure out a way to pass on those assets and some things and roadblocks that happen along the way. So Will be here. Just a little bit about us. We're an investment management and a financial planning firm. I'm a Statesville native. Grew up here, went to Wake Forest University, came back. How many people live inside the city limits? I'm also your city councilman, one of your city councilmen. So thank you. For those of you that live outside the city, I still like you. That's okay. You just can't vote for me, but your friends can. The agenda, again, is subject to change depending on the weather. If Congressman Budd couldn't get here, but he's on his way, I'm sure. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Everybody knows where the restrooms are, right behind us. Okay. We will take a break around 10 o'clock, but please hang around because, again, Ted will be here by 10:15. I'm going to encourage questions as we go along. This is not rigid. This is more of a discussion. And finally, at the end, you'll see at your table there is an evaluation form. That is not mandatory. That is something that if you would like to complete and fill out, we would certainly appreciate. This is how we figure out what to talk about next year. And the topics that you want to hear more about, maybe requesting some more information. If you'd like a complimentary consultation, we'll be happy to do that too. We found out that after 32 years of doing this and speaking to groups, that people don't necessarily like to air their dirty laundry in public. So you'd rather do it in private. So if you'd like to do that, we're more than happy to talk to you. Okay? Anyone know what happened this day in history, 1775? This day in history, April 19th, 1775.
What happened?
Well, no, that was 1995. 1995, that was the bombing of the Alfred, I can't remember the name of the federal center in Oklahoma. Timothy McVeigh bombed the Oklahoma Center, government center. But on this day in 1775, the Patriots at Lexington and Concord fired the first shots of our freedom for the country. So keep that in mind as we go along and as Ted speaks to you. Okay? Everybody survived tax day? Did you? You know what happens if you remove the space between the and IRS? It spells theirs. Did you ever wonder where a lot of that money goes that you're spending? You want to know? If the federal budget equaled $100, okay, over half of all the dollars, if the federal budget again was $100, over half were $54.11 were spent on only three categories. Anybody want to guess? Over half the money was spent on three things. Social Security got $23.61 of that. Medicare got $15.26 of that. And National Defense got $15.24. The interest on the budget, $6.25, was the fifth largest single expenditure. And that surpassed totals like the Veterans Administration, which got $4.58. Education got a whopping $2.08. Transportation got $2.39. And SSI, Social Security income, $1.53. Major social insurance and benefits programs comprise $42.84 of every $100 of federal spending between Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, SSI. You didn't know that the federal government was in the healthcare business, did you? Of course it is. Okay. Have you wondered where all that money is kept and what America's piggy bank looks like? How much liquid cash does the government actually have at one time? And who's in charge of the checkbook? While the amounts go up and down depending on the value of the markets, the U.S. generally has around $14 billion in liquid cash on hand on any given day. This is the amount deemed necessary to run the basic day-to-day operation. So essentially, it's the government's daily allowance, $14 billion. The total amount we normally have in the bank outside of ready cash averages around $200 billion. The lowest it's been is about $74 billion back in 2011. That was right after the recession. The rest of the money is made up of bonds, which is where a person buys U.S. currency as an investment, and it's currently the safest and most secure currency in the world is our dollar, and almost always likely to increase in value. The majority of these bonds are owned by foreign countries. Anybody guess the largest foreign country that owns most of our bonds and our debt? China. Everybody got that. Good. The person in charge of all this cash is technically the Secretary of the Treasury, but it's really carried out by the Undersecretary of Domestic Finance. Anybody know that? If you will picture the former as the CEO of a bank, while the latter is a cross between a CFO and a loan officer, Chief Financial Officer and a loan officer. They oversee a staff who keeps careful track of the checks that go out, like the ones you got for your tax refund. What's a refund? I haven't seen a refund in a while. And whether they've been cashed or not. It's your bank balance sheet, but it's very mind-boggling, vast in scale. Rather than being held in a regular bank, most of that $14 billion mentioned previously is held by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. This is almost all in the form of bills, $100 bills. The head of the bank has constant access to the account, a little bit like that little banking app that you have on your phone if you've got one of those, except they can measure the balance millisecond to millisecond because the amount is constantly changing. So where does all the money go from the $4.5 trillion that the government collects in taxes each year? Well, we talked a little bit about that. But Uncle Sam has bills, a lot of bills, from federal employee paychecks to defense spending to rent. The federal government is the largest single leaseholder in the country. Okay? So that's a little bit about where your money goes. We talked a little bit, also do 10 minutes every morning on WAME, Real Country, 92.9 at 5:50 a.m. And we talked about this yesterday, some pretty interesting tax facts that I thought I'd discuss with you this morning. What we're going to try to do is to give you a little bit of knowledge, give you a little bit of food for thought, give you a little bit of food for your belly, and hopefully entertain you just a little bit too. So a lot of this is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but these are true facts about taxes. You know, why is April 15th the tax deadline? Anybody know? When the 16th Amendment was introduced in 1913, the date was March the 1st. That changed to March the 15th in 1918 and was moved to April the 15th in 1955. The IRS claims that the move helped spread out the peak workload, and tax experts suspect that the real reason for pushing back the deadline is it gives the government a little bit more time to hang on to your money. Don't forget that this year's tax deadline was extended to April the 18th. Anybody know why it was the 18th instead of the 15th this year? 15th was Easter. It was on a Sunday. But typically it would have been on the next day, right? Okay. The 18th, or the 17th rather, was Emancipation Day in Washington, D.C., which is a federal holiday. So it was extended to April the 18th. Anybody know why we have an income tax? Why the income tax was created? It's to finance a war, the American Civil War, to be precise. The Revenue Act of 1861 was introduced to gather funds for the expensive conflict that lasted for 4 years. The price of war came in at about $2.5 million per day, and that's $1861. It's a very expensive war. You can make big money by reporting a company for tax evasion. Okay, so take note. It's called the Whistleblower Informant Award. Coming straight from the IRS website, I'm going to read this to you. The IRS whistleblower office pays money to people who blow the whistle on persons who fail to pay the tax that they owe. If the IRS uses information provided by the whistleblower, it can award the whistleblower up to 30% of the tax, penalty, and other amount that it collects. So if you know something and you want a clean conscience, you're going to get paid for it. Just let our friends at the IRS know. The federal tax code has grown to over 70,000 pages. 70,000 pages. It started life as 400 pages in 1913. It's hardly surprising now that 82% of taxpayers now turn to a tax accountant or tax software for help. If you're intimidated by 70,000 pages, it's only going to get worse. And I imagine Congressman Buck will talk to us about tax reform, which we're expecting to see sometime in May, maybe even June. Americans spend 7.6 billion hours every year preparing their taxes. 7.6 billion hours. Does that sound like a lot? Well, there are roughly 312 million people in America, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. That means that every man, woman, and child spends 24 and a half hours getting ready for tax day. Okay? Who has the world's highest corporate income tax? Corporate. New York City. From a figure from the 2009 Forbes report, that amount was 46.2%. That's followed by Illinois at 42.3%, Japan at 41%. We're a pretty honest crowd, and 89% of you think it's not okay to cheat on your taxes. In a survey done in 2008, the result was overwhelmingly in favor of staying honest. Now, considering that the survey was conducted by the IRS, you got to wonder what the other 11% of the people were thinking. Excuse me. Tax evasion is very prevalent in the world of babysitting. It seems that many as 95% of people who employ babysitters, housekeepers, or other home health aides are not quite as upfront about it as they should be. Over 700 wealthy Americans donated their 2010 tax breaks. That was the year that it was allowed to be done. It was a project called Responsible Wealth. It was supported by folks like Bill Gates and Richard Rockefeller. Did you know you can earn $10.3 billion and pay zero income tax? Well, it's not easy, but GE Corporation did it in 2008. By offsetting losses from another GE division, it was able to pay no taxes on the $10.3 billion pre-tax dollars it earned the year before. Even the head of the IRS, Douglas Shulman, uses a tax preparer. He gets his taxes done by a professional, and even when he does, you know that the tax laws have to be pretty complex. Americans spend $27.7 billion every year on tax preparation. Using that 312 million number of people in the U.S., that equates to about $90 for every person in the U.S. to file your tax return. There are more IRS employees than we have troops in Iraq. Enforcing 70,000 pages of complex tax law takes a lot of work. There are 106,000 IRS employees, and we currently have 45,000 troops in Iraq. And finally, the first ever income tax was collected in 1404, the year 1404. The place was England. It was so hated that all the records of it were burned. However, in 1798, Prime Minister William Pitt the Younger implemented income taxes to pay for weapons and equipment for the Napoleonic Wars. Taxes have been part of life ever since. So that's a little bit of insight as to why we have a federal tax system. We follow the markets, and I'm talking the financial markets, on a day-to-day basis. Week to week, month to month, you pay attention, turn the television on. Does it drive you crazy? Okay. Well, generally speaking, we are now better off economically than we have been in a very, very long time. And a lot of people are pointing to the fact that it's because of who this country elected. I'm not going to get into politics, but I'm going to tell you it's because the election is over, period. We have been on the brink of a good economic recovery for quite some time. You remember 2007, you remember 2008. when the world collapsed. You had the banking system fail, you had bonds in trouble, you had obviously the stock market in trouble, banks failed, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, the world was financially coming to an end. So what did most people do if they were invested in the market in 2007 and 2008? Well, they panicked, okay? And they said, I can't stand to lose anymore. They sat there and they watched the funds in their account go down and down and down and down. And finally, fear and paranoia took over and they took it out. And you put it in cash. Felt better, it's not going to go down anymore. Well, March the 9th, 2009 was the bottom of the stock market. After that, it began to climb. So you started watching a little bit, going, well, maybe it's coming back. I'll give it a little bit of time. 2010. It looks like things are going to recover. 2011. Maybe it's time to get back in. By then, you've missed a good portion of the recovery. Why I'm telling you this is very simple. The market is up, the stock market, and when I say that, I'm referring basically to the Standard & Poor's 500 index, the S&P 500, or the Dow Jones Industrial Average. I'll come back to those in just a minute. But when I say that, the reason I'm telling you this is because since the election, the market is up 14%. Markets don't move in straight lines. And that is 14% in 5 months. That's not quite unprecedented, but it's a huge move. We have entered with April, excuse me, our 97th month of a bull market. And then referring to a bull market, that's when the market is rising. What do we call it when the market is falling? A bear market. Okay? You know why we call it a bull and a bear? Side note. How does a bull attack? Alan, how's a bull attack? Head down?
Head down.
And horns up. Okay? How does a bear attack? Up here, down. Okay? Falling down. Bull and bear. Okay, so knowing that at some point, I'm not good enough to tell you when, but I can tell you with a high degree of certainty that at some point we're going to see the market begin to fall. I don't think it's catastrophic. I think it's a normal correction. And by correction, we mean about a 10% plus or minus drop in the market. We usually see that at least once a year. People forget about it. We had one last January. But what happened from October, or actually November, until the end of December made people forget about it. Okay? I think it'll be relatively short-lived. But if you are concerned about that, what can you do about it? Okay? Well, first is do nothing. Write it out. Because there hasn't been a time in history, and the history doesn't always repeat itself, but I've got a long time to look backwards. There's a reason that rear view mirror in the car is this big and the windshield is this big. Every time the market has fallen, it's recovered. It's just a matter of time. Some people have more time than others. That's one thing, is just to write it out. If you had stayed fully invested while the market fell in 2007 and 2008 and 2009, if you had stayed the course, the market is up almost 400% since then. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell to 6,000, and we're over 20,000 now. Okay? So markets do recover. The second thing you can do, my father used to say, you know, son, it's very difficult to be broke if you take a profit. Okay? So if you have a position in your account or an investment that maybe you started with $10,000 and it's grown to $15,000, maybe you want to take that profit out of that investment. We call that selling down to your cost basis, or going back to where you started, and deploy that $5,000 somewhere else. Okay? In other words, rebalance. One of the things we see a lot with our clients, before they become clients, we take care of that after they become clients, is a lot of times they just don't pay attention to those statements. Especially when the market is falling, they don't want to look at it. They just don't want to see what's going on. But to use a very technical financial term, sometimes things get out of whack. And with the market having increased as much as it has since November, it may very well be that the way that you wanted your assets diversified and spread out is not the way it is now. Maybe you've got too much risk now. You've got too much in equities or in stocks, and maybe you didn't want that. Okay? So that's one of the things you can do is to rebalance. If you haven't noticed, we're in a pretty low interest rate environment. How many people got that 5% CD? 4? 3? I'm getting closer. 2? Okay. The interest rate environment is the lowest we've seen in hundreds of years. And in studying all of this, I'm here to tell you that a low interest rate environment is going to be the norm for quite some time. Okay? You hear on television the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank that we referred to earlier, the Fed governors will raise interest rates. As a matter of fact, they already have. Janet Yellen is the chair of the Fed, and the governors get together and they decide if the economy is in a strong enough position to withstand a rate increase, or if it needs a rate decrease to spur on activity. Well, when the Fed raises rates, what they're talking about is a rate called the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is the rate that banks charge one another for overnight deposits. See, banks invest in each other. Banks also have money on deposit with the Federal Reserve. They have to, because of Dodd-Frank legislation, they have to have excess reserves in order of a bank collapse. But they also have discovered that they can put money with the Fed at about the same interest rate and get the same interest rate that they can by loaning it to you for a mortgage. So if I'm a bank, what incentive do I have to give you a loan when I can put it in U.S. Treasuries and get just about the same interest rate and have the full faith and credit of the United States government backing up my investment, and you might default on your loan? Okay? So banks aren't really taking a lot of risk. So when the Fed raises interest rates, you'll see interest rates at banks change. Initially, for the worst. The banks are very quick to raise interest rates on the bad things, like credit card rates, mortgage rates, car loans. And they're very, very slow to raise interest rates on money market accounts, savings accounts, and certificates of deposit. Okay? So those low interest rates that we're seeing now are going to hang around for quite some time. I doubt, I'm 53, almost 54 years old, and I don't think I will ever see a 5% interest rate the rest of my life. I don't think it'll happen. Okay? So with that, a lot of our clients need income. Social Security may not be enough, and they're living off of income from their portfolio. So where do you look for income? Anybody? What's out there that creates income? A job. There you go. That's always a good one. And and people are doing that. People are retiring later now than they used to. And even after they retire, my own father-in-law, after he retired, he decided he didn't want to sit at home, so he has a part-time job. So just to get out of the house. But there are other places, other things out there that create income. So just starting, if you picture a ladder, let's start at the bottom rung and work our way up. Okay? Bottom being very low volatility. I hate the word risk because every investment, including a certificate of deposit, has risk. Okay? It's just the amount of risk that it has. So at the bottom would be that certificate of deposit, a money market account, an FDIC insured money market account, a savings account, and you're looking at 1% or less depending on the term for that investment. Okay? There are some places, some online banking institutions, if you're comfortable putting your funds in a place that you can't walk into and see somebody, there are online banks. They are federally chartered banks with FDIC coverage. And you can see 1-year CD at about 2%, okay? Occasionally. So let's start there. Other things like U.S. Treasuries, bills, notes, and bonds. Again, these are instruments that are issued by the federal government. Everybody knows that principal is guaranteed, right? On one day, and that's maturity date. If you buy a 30-year bond, what the government is doing is taking your money, and they're going to pay you interest on that 30-year bond every year, and on maturity date, 30 years from now, they'll give you your principal back. But in the meantime, bonds move just like stocks do. Not as much, but they're affected by interest rates. They're affected by market forces. So the value of that bond, the safest investment on the planet, we just talked about that earlier, again, backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government, And if they can't pay the bills, what do? Raise taxes. That bond could be worth more or less than what you paid for it, if you have to cash it in early. Now, there are ways around that by using different investment vehicles like mutual funds rather than buying one bond. And again, I'm not espousing that everybody should do what we're talking about here. I'm throwing some ideas out at you. There is not one size fits all for anybody. Bottom line, in the investment world, if you can't put your head on a pillow at night and sleep with what you've done, it's not worth it. Okay? So keep that in the back of your mind. Other places to look for income. And there are particular insurance products that are out there. Anybody heard of annuities? Heard of annuities? Saying annuities is like saying car. There are a lot of different types of annuities. Okay? Starting with the most vanilla, it would be something called a fixed annuity. A fixed annuity looks like a certificate of deposit in the fact that it pays a set interest rate for a set period of time. That annuity is guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the insurance company that issued it. Okay? The interest that's earned on an annuity is not taxable until it's withdrawn. We call that tax deferred. The problem with annuities, again, is they have to, when you give your money to the insurance company, they in turn have to invest it in something to create that income to pay you, right? Well, where do they invest it? In government bills, notes, and bonds. So the interest rates on fixed annuities are not much better than what you're seeing on certificates of deposit. Some annuities will offer a first-year bonus rate. I'll call it a teaser rate, if you will. And they'll pay you a higher interest rate the first year. But know that in the second year, that interest rate's probably going to be a little bit lower unless interest rates go through the roof. You have to look at it for the long term. That's one of the other downfalls, or one of the other considerations, rather, not necessarily downfall, is that there are penalties for early withdrawal, just like a certificate of deposit. So you're going to be married to that annuity company for a set period of time. From there are other types of annuities, fixed index annuities. That's an annuity that ties whatever interest you make to an index. May it be the S&P 500. If the market goes up, you go in today, 12 months from today. If the market is up, you go up. If the market, the S&P 500, is down, you don't go down. So your worst return is zero. Well, a lot of people think, well, now I'm investing in the market and I'm not taking any risk. Okay. The risk is something known as a cap rate. That insurance company has to make money. They're very good at it. Okay? We'll come back to that in just a minute. But the cap rate is the highest interest rate that they will pay you. For example, if during the next 12 months, the S&P 500 is up 10%, they're not going to give you 10. They may give you 5. Okay? So cap rates tied to interest rates are also very low. So in all of this, what I'm trying to drill into you is that before you get into something, before you invest in something, ask a lot of questions. Because we all know that if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Okay? Finally, there are annuities like variable annuities. A variable annuity looks like a 401k plan, or if you've had a 401k plan at work. It is one particular product that has upwards of 100 different investment choices in it. And you get to choose how you want to invest it based on how much risk you want to take. And there's all kinds of bells and whistles and features and options that you can get. Not for everybody, but again, if it fits the right particular need, then that's another option in terms of income. From there, and again, you'll probably, if you haven't heard, you will hear about the emergence of things like real estate investment trust. Investing in real estate. Not going out and buying a house, but investing in an investment vehicle, a product, that also invests in real estate. And interest rates there, distribution rates are higher. I'm not even going to quote the interest rates because they're all over the map. They're 4% to as much risk as you want to take from their double digits. Okay? But again, make sure you ask a lot of questions and understand exactly what it is that you're getting into before you invest. Finally, I want to say this. if you have paid attention to the equity markets, the stock market, you know that a lot of companies, a lot of stocks pay dividends. And there are companies like, oh, not a recommendation, I'm just mentioning, Johnson & Johnson, who has increased the amount of their quarterly dividend every year for the last 60 years. Now, the value of that stock, of Johnson & Johnson stock, has been all over the map. But that dividend continues to come out. So we've got a saying here in our county, if you want to finish it with me, you can, that if you bought the cow for the milk, don't worry about the price of the beef. So in other words, if you're investing for income, understand that that value may go up and it may go down. So a lot of that just depends on your comfort level. But again, the financial markets, economically, we're in a lot better shape than we have been in quite some time. Unemployment is low. The real unemployment number is not the unemployment number that's reported by the government, but it is still lower than it has been in quite some time. Seasonal jobs, part-time jobs are not included. People that have finally given up and decided they don't want to look for work anymore, they're done, they're off the rolls. That's a bigger number than what the government is reporting. Unemployment is floating around 5%, but nonetheless, it is still a lower number than what it has been in quite some time. Okay? We've seen this week earnings reports of companies that are in the S&P 500, and I told you I'd come back to that. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, when you turn on CNN or CNBC, and you see the ticker across the bottom, and you see the symbol DJIA, Dow Jones Industrial Average, floating at 20,500 right now. Don't know where it is this morning, but somewhere over 20,000. How many stocks make up that index? How many stocks are in the Dow Jones Industrial Average? Anybody guess? 30. So the entire performance and people's opinion of how the market is performing is dependent on 30 stocks. And there are thousands of publicly traded companies. Now, the S&P 500 index, work with me here. If the Dow Jones had 30, S&P 500 has how many? There you go. And then you go from there from the Russell 2000 to Russell 1000. So I like a bigger number to compare to. But again, earnings reports of the S&P 500 companies are starting to come out. They have to bring quarterly reports out to let you know how much money they have made. Was it more than they expected? Was it less than they expected? Last quarter, over 80% of the companies showed a positive result, and most of them were higher than what they expected. It looks like that trend is continuing. Okay? Well, William, if that's continuing, why then is the market going to have a correction? Well, it always does. Okay? That's the technical answer. You've got to let a little air out of the balloon before it bursts. Okay? And a lot of times there's a triggering event. Well, I don't know, a missile going off in North Korea, warships headed down the peninsula. You know, a war is great for the economy, but it's not so good for the market to begin with. Okay? There's a lot of things that trigger people's emotions, and it used to be the market was driven by earnings. Now markets are driven by emotion. But consumer sentiment, okay? Show of hands. How many of you feel better now than you did 2 or 3 years ago? Not physically, but fiscally. Fiscally. How many attitudes are better? How do you feel better? Okay? And consumer sentiment is higher now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. We still had that recession in our mind. Okay? So that's one thing to keep in mind. Again, if you have a portfolio, if you've got investments, if you're concerned about it, talk to your investment advisor that you deal with. Let them know what you're thinking, because we can't guess. You know, I'm like the preacher Sunday morning. I can stand up here and preach at you, but if you don't take it home and live with it, that's not my responsibility. You've got to let us know what it is that you're comfortable with, the questions that you have, and you need to ask a lot of questions. Okay? All right. Any questions so far? I'm making you drink out of a fire hose. No questions so far. Okay. We're going to do something a little fun. Reach in your pocket or your pocketbook, one of the two, and pull out a $1 bill. I can loan you one. I want it back. Four quarters won't work. I need a $1 bill. That ain't gonna work. However, if you give me that and your PIN number, I'll be back in a minute. We're going to talk a little bit about that currency that you have in your hand, that dollar bill. The most common paper money that we have is a $1 bill. You don't have a dollar bill? He's going to loan you a dollar bill? Okay. Anybody not have a dollar bill? I got a couple. I need it back. You got one, okay. Look at the front of the dollar bill. That's the side that we normally see. It's got President Washington's engraving in the center. The dollar bill in this configuration first came off the press in 1957. Now that material that it's printed on is printed by one company, the Crane Paper Company of Massachusetts. Crane has held the exclusive contract since the Civil War. Now, although it's referred to as paper money, that's not paper. It's actually a paper-like cloth made of cotton and linen, has very fine silk fibers woven throughout. That's why it can survive the accidental washings to which most of us have subjected it to on occasion. The formula for the material and the special ink used in printing the dollar is not publicly known, and it never will be. The dollars are printed with elaborate engravings and symbols and then treated to achieve water resistance. They're starched and pressed so that they're crisp when they're new. The green seal on the right is the seal of the U.S. Treasury. Inside that seal, you see a set of scales. That represents a balanced budget. In the center, you have the carpenter's square, a tool of precision used to attain an even cut. The Treasury has to be very exact in its work. Now, underneath is the key to the U.S. Treasury. The founding date below, 1789, that was the adoption of what in the United States? It was the adoption of our Constitution. Our country was transformed in that year from a confederation to a federation. A federal government that is one of centralized authority required a national Treasury Department. The Constitution created the Postal Secretary of the Treasury, and the Treasury was ultimately to issue a common national currency. Alexander Hamilton, a widely known financier, was the first Secretary of the Treasury. He had founded earlier the Bank of New York and made his first loan, $200,000, to help the fledgling nation finance the Revolutionary War. Today, the Bank of New York is America's oldest operating corporation, and its shares were the first to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Now, on the left is a modification of the seal of the Federal Reserve, and if you look closely, you'll see the name of the bank which issued the dollar that you're holding. The bold letter in the center is the letter symbol of the issuing bank. For example, L denotes the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, F is Atlanta, D is Cleveland, and so on and so forth. I have no idea why they didn't use S, A, and C. Okay? The authorizing signatures of the Treasury of the United States and the Secretary of the Treasury and office at the time of the issuance of that dollar are printed on the lower portions of the left and the right side, respectively. Now, while the front of the dollar is pretty interesting, it's the back that contains the most captivating symbolism. It's intriguing that we pay very scant attention to the back of the dollars, as the back is telling a more fascinating story. So turn the dollar over, and let's take a look at that one. Okay? You see two large circles, one to the right, one to the left, of the centered word one. Both circles combine to form the Great Seal of the United States of America. Most Americans aren't aware that we have a two-sided seal, if you know that we have a seal at all. Still, creating the right seal was a very serious matter to the country's founders. Accordingly, none other than the great sage Benjamin Franklin was appointed by the First Continental Congress to head the committee charged with creating the seal. 4 years later, the seal was submitted. 2 years after that, it was approved, and obviously the nation's founders considered the symbolism of the seal very important if it takes 6 years for them to approve it. But that is, in fact, folks, how things move in Washington. First, take a look at the seal's front, which is on the right-hand side of the dollar. We see it often slightly modified as the seal of the President of the United States. It's always visible when he speaks. It's also the symbol most commonly used on heroes' monuments. It's displayed at every national cemetery, even those abroad, like in Normandy. The bald eagle was selected for the center of the disc for 2 reasons. First, an eagle doesn't fear a storm. He's strong and can soar above it. Second, unlike many birds, he doesn't have any adorning top-knot feathers on the top of his head, thus he wears no crown. We had just severed our bonds to the King of England, and the English government was referred to commonly as the Crown. Among America's founders, there was a great dislike for anything hinting of royalty. Now notice that the shield is unsupported. This was to symbolize that the new country could stand on its own. The slender white bar atop the shield symbolizes the Congress of the United States, a critical unifying element of new government. It sits at the top of the 13 stripes on the shield, which in turn symbolize, anybody guess? 13 original colonies that had come together as one independent nation. Now held in the eagle's beak is a ribbon with a Latin inscription, E pluribus unum, meaning one from many. Many people that also come together to form a single country. Above the eagle there are 13 stars, also representing the 13 colonies. Being dispersed around them are clouds of misunderstanding. The rolling back of the clouds further signifies that the colonies had buried old disputes and banded together for the common good. In the eagle's talons, he holds two opposing symbols. In the right talon, he has grasped an olive branch, a symbol of peace. In the left, he clutches a bundle of arrows, the symbol of war. The eagle is looking towards the olive branch, signifying that this country desires peace. Always want to face the olive branch, but in a time of war, he's prepared with his bundle of arrows. Now, if you look at the left-hand circle, you'll see a pyramid. Notice that the face is lighted, while the western side, the left side, is dark. This country was just beginning. We had not begun to deeply explore the West or learn what we could do to broaden Western civilization. The pyramid's cap is above it, but it's not set in place. This was to illustrate that we were not finished with the construction of this new nation. Now, inside the capstone is the all-seeing eye, an ancient symbol for divinity. It was Mr. Franklin's belief that one person could achieve little alone, but he held that a group of people, with God's help, could do amazing things, even create a special nation. The Roman numerals of the pyramid's base are 1776, the year of the colony's Declaration of Independence and the founding of the new nation. In the sky above the pyramid, you see the Latin words Annuit Quectus, which means God has favored this undertaking. And the Latin on the scroll below the pyramid, Novus Ordo Secularum, translates to a new order has begun. The fact that there are 13 steps on the pyramid, again recognizing the 13 original colonies that made our nation possible, begs a question. Why should any American regard the number 13 as unlucky? The framers of our government, creators of the seal, didn't. Yet 13 is a number regarded almost universally as unlucky. You're not going to find a public building with a 13th floor, okay, or a room number 13. But consider this. We got 13 original colonies. There are 13 steps on the seal's pyramid. 13 stars above the eagle, 13 bars on the shield, 13 lines in the wide horizontal bar atop the shield, 13 arrows in the left talon, 13 leaves on that olive branch, and if you look very closely, 13 olives on the branch as well. If that's not enough, please recall that there were 13 signers of the Declaration of Independence. There are 13 stripes on the country's flag, 13 letters in the words E pluribus unum, and 13 letters in Annuit Quectus. 13 is a very fortunate number for the United States. It's very interesting that people consider it unlucky. So therein lies your history of the dollar bill. Now, if you'll hand all those dollar bills up to me. And if anybody would like a copy of this, I'll be happy to. Just let me know. I'll be happy to. Okay. Our next speaker is Congressman Ted Budd. Ted represents this congressional district, which is now the 13th district. It was redone after we used to be in the 5th district. We're now in the 13th district. He's serving his first term in the 115th U.S. Congress. Ireland, Davy, Rowan, Guilford.
Right. You said Davy, so that's it.
That's it. That's it.
You need 5, that's it.
That's it. Ted's on the Financial Services Committee, which is huge as a freshman member. That's great, and we're very proud to have him there. He's a graduate of Appalachian State University, and near and dear to my heart, he has an MBA from Wake Forest. So I'm sure that's why he got elected. So, yeah. All right.
I was smart enough, maybe I wouldn't have run. Thank you. Do I need this microphone?
Not if you don't need it.
We can just come out here, is that okay? And tell me if I need to speak up, speak less, or just quit altogether. All right? We can do that. So, thank you, William. Thanks for helping coordinate this day. I know it's very important and a lot of good issues to cover. And where is Phyllis? I met Phyllis. I think Phyllis is in the back for helping to coordinate this too. So, grateful. Before I get started, just know that our office is about 25-30 minutes from here. So, if you are inclined to go there, great. We are inclined to come here all the time. So, love to come and be available as much as possible. My district director, Todd Poole, is right there in the back. Todd, if you would wave. Todd has served as a chief of staff in Washington, D.C. He served as a director of the state Republican Party. But we represent anybody from any party as far as how we interface with the federal government. So whatever we can do, it's in the 336 area code. 998-1313 is our number, and I'll be glad to repeat that. It's 336-998-1313. So anything we can do, if it's a veterans issue or anything, we have somebody that helps with taxes and just can answer questions, policy related, and that's the district office down at exit 180. So come see us. We'll come see you here too. Yes, so it's 336-998. And because we're in the 13th district, 1313. There we go. Great. Great. And so I want to give you a little history. So in 1956, people started asking the question, well, why is Wake Forest in Winston-Salem? Right? You mentioned Wake Forest. And it goes back to 1956 when the town of Wake Forest had a college named Wake Forest, and R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Company from Winston-Salem moved, or they paid for that college to move to Winston-Salem. They wanted a basketball program, so they were recruiting young players. There were a lot of good players up in the Northeast, and there was a man named Dave Budd at Woodbury High School, who was pretty well known up in the area. So they recruited Dave Budd to be on the first basketball team at Wake Forest. And his younger brother was my dad, or is my dad. And my dad followed his older brother down here in the late 50s and early 1960s. Now, Uncle Dave, who was playing basketball for Wake Forest, he was about 6'6", 6'7", and I did not get his skills, in case you're wondering. That's why maybe I ran for office, is because I couldn't play ball. He went to play for the New York Knicks, and he got really famous, not because he was so great at playing professional basketball, but because he was guarding Wilt Chamberlain the night that Wilt scored 100 points. So secondarily, we got some fame out of that one from Mr. Wilt Chamberlain. So my dad went to High Point University, got to be with a great friend, a mentor. My dad had lost his father at a young age. So Dr. Joseph May was an obstetrician from Winston-Salem, but was friends and had gone to High Point University. And he was a mentor to my dad. He helped my dad get started in a janitorial supply and product company. So, and then that later became a janitorial company, cleaning buildings, later mowing grass, later doing security for any commercial operations. But he would always take me around and introduce me to anybody that was running for office. And one time, and this would have been in the late 1980s, Richard Nixon came back to town, and after he was kind of rebuilding his reputation, and I got to meet him, and I said, you know what, one day maybe I would want to run for office. But I thought that'd be years down the road, because I've still got young kids at home. I've got a 17-year-old son, I've got a 15-year-old daughter, and I've got a 12-year-old daughter. And before I decided to run, I said to my wife, Amy Kate, I said, what do you think about this opportunity? Because, you know, they were redistricting the whole state last spring, about 14 months ago. And somebody had suggested that I take a shot at this. And so I let my wife and my kids know, and I said, look, you all heard of veto power. I said, each of you have veto power, even to my 12-year-old. And they thought about it, they prayed about it for a few days, and they would ask questions, and we'd talk about it, and they came back, and my 17-year-old, I guess he was the spokesman, he said, Dad, I think it'd be cool. You need to do it. So, and it worked out. So here I am. I didn't realize that once you win, you got to keep running. And not just every 2 years, but once you get there, they have committees, and you got to end up on a committee. And you have to go in, you have to speak with the chairman and tell them why you want to be on this or that committee. And so we feel very blessed to be on what's called an A-level committee. They have A, B, and C-level committees. And they don't give, Paul Ryan looked at me right in the eyes and said, we do not give A-level committees to freshmen. But I am a freshman here, and I have an A-level committee. So I'm very grateful for it. I think you're talking a lot about finances, wills, trust today. Very, very important issues. That falls underneath the jurisdiction of the House Financial Services Committee. So that's what I get to work on. I get to participate in those discussions. So Janet Yellen from the Fed, we bring her in twice a year, and we question her to make sure the Fed has sound policies. Richard Cordray from the Consumer Protection Financial Protection Bureau, we bring him in to make sure that he's acting in a constitutional manner. So those are the things that we do. Flood insurance, the Dodd-Frank that happened about 9 years ago now, that we think has really restricted banks in their ability to serve us as consumers. So we are looking for ways to free those up where they still have to be transparent and responsible to us as citizens, but it gives them more freedom to do what they need to do. Allows people like William Morgan to be able to more effectively serve as financial planners. So those are the things that we work on. I think about my next generation. I think about my kids and those 3 that I mentioned to you earlier. And I think about 20 trillion. That's 20,000 billions. How much debt we have as a country. And you don't get there by accident. You get there by collusion. And so I want to help unwind that. And the way you do it is you have to deregulate. You have to grow our economy. So I'm thinking about, we just left International Paper just down the road from here, about 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe have some family that works there. So so it's companies like that are allowed to grow. And that's a 25, it's a little plant down here, nice size plant for Statesville. But that's a $22, $23 billion company. And a lot of their presence is right here in this congressional district. We've got to let people grow and create jobs. And that's what ends up paying the taxes that pays down that debt. But we've got to act responsibly there. Let me give you just a little bit of a legislative update. We all saw, so let me try to balance what we hear in the news versus what actually goes on. And then I'll take a couple of questions, and I want to make sure that would you be the timekeeper for us? Oh, sure. All right, great. And I'll look for the hook. All right. Okay. Great.
I'll be the timekeeper.
You'll be the timekeeper. That's great. That's great. The longer, you just kick me off stage anytime you want, all right? So about health care. Did anybody hear about the tool we used called reconciliation? Reconciliation is a tool that the House can use, the House of Representatives can use, that puts budget neutral policy, and we can pass it. We always pass things with a simple majority in the House. And there's 435 of us, so that's over 218. So if we can pass it through the House, then we get to the Senate, and it takes 60 to pass the Senate. If we use reconciliation, we can pass this type of legislation in a reconciliation tool. We can pass it with 51 votes. And so that is why we use that tool called reconciliation. But you have to be very careful what you put in there. Because anybody remember Senator Robert Byrd from West Virginia a few years back? My wife is originally from West Virginia. So he was the one that when she graduated from college up there, he was the one that was the graduation speaker. So we got to see him up close and personal years ago. But there is a rule called the Byrd Rule, and it has to be budget neutral. And anything you put in there can make it get kicked out once it goes to the Senate. So that's why, as Speaker Paul Ryan said, we're putting 20 pounds of policy in a 5-pound sack, and we're trying to get it through. What happened about 3 or 4 weeks ago when healthcare did not pass is what we saw. And remember, it never came to a vote. A lot of people had thanked me or you know, told me I should have done something different when it came to that. I was personally opposed to that, and for different reasons than some other people were opposed to it, because I thought it would drive our premiums up. Those who are not on Medicare, I thought it would drive those premiums up. And that is not what I was elected to do. So we think we can do better, and we think we can still do it with, So this is they call this last week and this week a recess week. It ain't vacation, right? So that is when we're doing what we're supposed to be doing back in the district, answering questions, being available to those who sent me there. So we think we're going to come back and we're going to tackle healthcare as best as possible. But we'll all find out when we get back. So watch the news for next week and we'll see the order and the sequence which we're working on legislation. Next thing will be tax reform. And that's led by Representative Kevin Brady out of Texas. And remember that 20,000 billions worth of debt, the 20 trillion worth of debt? We have not had significant tax reform since 1986, and that's when President Reagan was in office. So if we can reform our taxes, that is one more means to grow our economy, make us more competitive internationally, and allow us to become a greater exporter nation, to have more manufacturing jobs here and more real work here. And that's one more way to grow our economy. So that's very important. And so that's the next thing. But there's lots of victories that we've had that we may not even see in the news. Very much like reconciliation, there's a tool called the CRA. It comes from the term Congressional Review Act of 1974. And what that does is it allows us to actively go into the Federal Register and pick out rules which we think have hurt our economy, rules which were written not by Congress, not by the Senate, but by unelected bureaucrats, which have hurt businesses. And maybe some of either you were affected by them or your children or your grandchildren are affected by them. And they have actually lost jobs because of some of these rules. And with this CRA tool, we can actively disapprove of these rules and remove them from the Federal Register. And we can pass the Senate with those with 51 votes. Before this Congress, that's been done one time in 2001 with ergonomics rule. Ergonomics, like how your chair fits at work and how your keyboards work. We've done those. We did that one time in 2001. In the past 3 or 4 months since we've been in office, we've done that 15 times, and 12 have been signed by the President. House to the Senate and up to the President 12 times already. So those are wins, but they're not, I guess the news wouldn't think they're very newsworthy. So anyway, those are something you can look up. If you have computer access, feel free to look up the Congressional Review Act and the CRA rules. Want to mention our President and Vice President. I've had a chance to meet with them and talk with them by phone. I'm not sure where you stand with them. Lots of people have mixed opinions. I am very pleased to have him in office, and he is not a politician, and I'm not either. So one of the things he faced was a 17-way primary. And another thing that he had was he had never been in office before. Well, as I look at my race across this 13th district, which runs from High Point, Greensboro area down here to just below us in Mooresville, I had a 17-way primary. And then I'd never been in office before, and I was a business person. So I think this is the year of the outsider, those who never run in office before, that remember what it's like to not be in office, to not be in politics. And so that's what I want to keep doing. While I want to be really effective and serve really well while I'm up there and build a great team with guys like Todd Poole in our district office and our office up in Washington, I want to do that really, really well. But I want to remember what it's like to be right here. I want to remember that I'm from a farm over here in Davie County. And I want to remember how anything we do in Washington affects those that are in these jobs like the International Paper Plant or us right here at the Senior Center. So that's the goal. That's what I want to do. And I think our president remembers that. And I think he is a very fast learner. One thing he did is there was a financial rule that he wrote an executive order on, and did not tell us in Congress, especially in the, and it was, we think it was a dropped ball, and it was a miscommunication. And we let them know from the House Financial Services Committee. Please let us know when you do things like this. Within 24 to 48 hours, we were getting phone calls. Anything he did that related to our committee, we were getting customer service phone calls to give us a heads up. Mistakes are okay, as long as you learn from them and learn from them fast. Okay, I think he is a very fast learner, and he's not constricted by having to be there. I got to realize that I'm a business person. I got family here. It's my privilege to serve. I don't have to go to Washington, but I get to. And in that way, while some ways it's a sacrifice because I don't get to see my family every night for dinner, I think about those men and women in uniform who we send overseas for a year at a time. I've got nothing to complain about, and it's a real privilege. So thank you very much. I'll be right here for questions and anything you have. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. So I am on the term limits bill, the term limits amendment, and there's several versions of that going around. The most popular version is, the question is term limits. And I think any version of it is good. And just to remember that, look, I didn't come in for a career. It's really easy for my freshman class, which is the 115th Congress. All of us, not all of us, but most all of us, Democrats and Republicans, are for term limits. Because we've only been there for 4 months, right? We don't know what it's like to have been there 20 years. So we might as well be at the start of it. And then, in essence, grandfather those who've been in there longer. And allow, as they retire out, the new ones that come in. But so there's several versions of it. I think the one is, if you want to look up, congress.gov is a great website. Congress.gov is a great website to look up bills, and you can type in any topic, and you can see what bills and where they are in the process. The one by Ron DeSantis out of Florida is the main one that I'm on as a co-sponsor. So, good question. Right, like you had. Anyway, yeah.
Well, you did good because you've got 10 more minutes.
Oh my goodness, how do I feel that? All right, thank you. My goodness. Well, I figured you might have a few questions and hear about any concerns that you have. But anyway, I'll just be around.
Where'd your wife go to college?
She went to Marshall University. Cool story, since Russia's in the news a lot, right? In 1991, I went on a mission trip to the USSR, and I say that USSR intentionally, because when we went, that's what it was, and a week after we got home, it was no longer the USSR. So it was August of 1991, so that was 25 and a half years ago that I went on that mission trip, and we flew Aeroflot over there. There were 400 of us from the U.S. I was a young college student at the time, and she had come from Marshall University with the college group. I had come from Appalachian State, and we converged in Russia. We went to Moscow, Kiev, and then Leningrad, which was converting to St. Petersburg at the time. So we stood at the cusp of history, and we didn't know it while we were there. We were in Red Square, seeing the cars come in and out of Red Square, and it didn't have a baseline of history as a 19-year-old for me to know that was more than normal and something was suspicious. Yeltsin was at the airport shaking hands. And so we really didn't realize until a week later when we were home. We turned on this brand new network, which was called CNN. Brand new to us, at least, because cable was new in Davie County. And was able to see Red Square, where we had just stood, full of people, and Yeltsin's statue coming down. Not Yeltsin, excuse me, Lenin's statue coming down. So, we never know what history we're standing in the middle of. Thank you so much.
Anything else?
Yeah.
Your website, tedbudd.com.
Yeah, tedbudd.com, that's the campaign one, and the other one is, what is it?
Bud.house.gov.
Yeah, I can remember that. Okay. Yeah. So I'm in the house, I'm in people's house, so it's Bud, my last name, BUDD.house.gov. Feel free to look that up, send us a message, and we try to be very responsive and accessible.
You're also on Facebook.
Yes, we're on Facebook, And we have, make sure you differentiate between the campaign side and the official side. The official side, feel free to look at that. If you want to really communicate with us, probably best to go to the budhouse.gov, and you can send a message under different topics, and that'll get routed to the right person.
And I called your office in DC and spoke with Tyler, and he was great.
Tyler is excellent. So he is our legislative correspondent, and Tyler is from Germantown, just north of Winston-Salem. So he's from the area. Got a lot of North Carolinians working there. Right.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, thank you, Wade. Great. Have a great day.
Everybody, thanks,
Right.
Dan.
Good to see you. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you. What's your name?
Okay. I hate to be Randy Cass right now. Ted's a hard act to follow. You may have got these phone calls. Hi, I'm from the IRS. You owe us. Have you gotten the phone call? And they'll quote your name, is Sally there? And you say yes. Well, we've seen an increase, a huge increase, a rise in scams and in frauds, and especially with senior citizens. So I've asked Captain Randy Cass from the Howard County Sheriff's Department to come talk to us about how we can recognize it, how we can address it, how we can inform the Sheriff's Office, and how we can possibly avoid being a victim.
Thank y'all for having me. It is going to be a very hard act to follow. I can tell you that. My name is Randy Cass. I'm a captain with the Sheriff's Office. I've been there since 1991. Actually, tomorrow is my anniversary, so it'll be 26 years tomorrow. So I do accept presents. If it's money, put it in William's name.
He just won't wear it all.
Speaking of scams, on behalf of Sheriff Campbell, he was coming. He was going to be here with us today, but I don't know if anybody has saw the news, if you follow Facebook. There was a church in North Iredell that got vandalized, and he's actually there doing well, I'll put it plain English. He has the young officer there, and he's giving him all of his glory for what he did, going above and beyond. Because the officer actually went and painted the church for him while he was on duty. So he painted where they went and put the swastika on the door. And that's the type of office that we have. And that's the type of officers that Sheriff Campbell is pushing. But let me clarify that, because I think that kind of sounded bad. He didn't paint the swastika. He painted over the swastika. Okay? So let me make sure I clarify that some. So that's why the sheriff is not here. I think some of the news was coming up, and then we're going to speak with the officer and Sheriff Campbell. So on behalf of him, I'm here speaking. Scams. William just mentioned a couple of them that we're having. And it is really a big thing that's going on now. We get, I hate to put it plain English like this, but we get to it. Why do we get to it? Why is everybody trying to protect us? Because I've said it forever, and I still will say it. Iredell County is a very trusting and loving county. We're family oriented. We're raised that way from birth. And that's the way that we've been taught our whole lives. Now, unfortunately, there are people out here that want to take advantage of that. So one I want to talk to you about is a grandparent scam. Has anybody ever had this? Has anybody ever heard about this? Grandparent scam goes one of two ways. Did you?
Yeah.
Okay. If I get off, tell me which one you was so I can pass it on to our detectives. Grandparent scam goes one of two ways. It's jail or hospital. And I think it's because it's men versus women. If they call scamming, and they call somebody and say, hey, your grandson, your daughter, your friend, your family has been hurt, they're in the hospital, the insurance will pay all but $50 if you could send this down here to us at North Myrtle Regional Medical Center. Here's the address. Who do you think they're going to try to hit with that? The men or the women? Why? Exactly. Women are more caring and soft-hearted and understanding and family-oriented than men. We're going to be, you better get his insurance. I ain't sending you no money. So, now, the other side of that coin is hey, Randy's got down here, senior break, he's being crazy, he's acting up, we've done arrested him, he's in jail, he has $400 in his pocket, but he needs $50 to make the rest of the bill. We're calling, can you send the money? Here's the address to North Myrtle Police Department, or whatever it is, Horry County. You know, can you send that to us? Who do you think they're going to go there? The males. Because every boy don't want you to call mom and tell mama I'm in jail. So that's just the difference. So that happens. And it is happening to a lot of different people. And they're using that scam. Was one of yours similar to that?
Yeah, they called and told me all this stuff, and I talked to a girl, and I let her talk. I don't have a granddaughter. She said she was my granddaughter later on in the conversation. I said, I'm sorry, you got the wrong person. I don't have a granddaughter.
What?
But she said, Grandma, are you getting Alzheimer's because you don't remember me?
Wow.
So you said, well, there was this one time in Russia. Right. No, but that happens. Now, one thing that I want to always try to get everybody to understand is a term called spoofing. Has anybody heard of that? Does anybody know what spoofing is? Spoofing is where they actually can take a phone number and they make it look as if it is a legitimate phone number that calls you. So in the situation I gave you with the hospital, it would show up North Myrtle Beach Regional when you look at your caller ID. Don't fall for that. It's the same thing with the IRS scheme. As much as we want it, and William can go and correct me if I'm wrong, and the gentleman over here, I'm sorry about the names, Will can correct me if I'm wrong. IRS is not going to be calling you and saying, Randy, give me my $20 now or I'm locking you up. Okay? That's a scam. Hang up, call us. Let us know. Don't give them information. Don't tell them anything because it's a scam. They're not going to do that. Now, is the IRS going to come after you for $2? Probably. You know, they're not going to get you your $2 back, but they're going to get your $2. Now, when that happens, just give us a call. Let us know. Maybe something we really can do. It may be nothing that we can do. But now we start getting an idea that something is going on in the community. We're starting to get these phone calls. We can get it out on our social media. We can get it out on the radio shows tomorrow morning, different things like that, that we can go and start letting everyone know. We can get it out on our website. And that's what we try to do, get out in the community. Hey, this is going on. Anybody ever heard of Irish Travelers? They put it in the old saying, we was always, and like I said, I'm born and raised here, but gypsies. You ever heard of gypsies? It's Irish Travelers. Irish Travelers will come through. They're from South Carolina. They're so big, so popular, they make so much money that SLED, which is South Carolina's SBI, actually has a division that deals strictly with the gypsies. And they're called Irish Travelers. And what they'll do, and you've heard it and you've seen it, they'll come up wanting to pave your driveway with extra asphalt they have. They'll want to paint your roof. They'll want to paint your barn. You know, all these different things. And it's a scam. It don't work. The paint that they put on will turn around. As soon as it rains like today, it starts washing off. But you've paid and it's gone. But now when they're doing it, it looks really nice, pretty. It's a new shiny penny. But not when they leave. So be careful with that. Let me ask you a question. What have an attorney say here? If I come up, and this gentleman right here, what's your name, sir? Bruce. Bruce. If Bruce agrees, yeah, I'm going to let you paint my barn. You're going to paint my roof. Now, Bruce agrees that I'm going to do that. Yes, sir, I'm going to do it. I've got my crew right here. You know, Bruce, it's getting lunchtime. I'm only going to charge $100. But if I can get $20 now, I want to go and get lunch, and we'll be back and finish it. They'll get to $20, they leave, and they do come back and finish it because they want the other $80, right? But now, what has just happened between me and Bruce when he paid me?
Contract.
What kind of contract?
Binding?
Binding, basically. It's a civil contract. You've entered into a monetary agreement, and now he has paid me. Correct me if I'm wrong. It is not criminal. Now it's civil, so when you call me, I'm going to go up and like, Bruce, man, I'm sorry. You got 5 minutes with him. I'll see you in a minute. So be careful. When something, listen, y'all taught us forever. If something sounds too good to be true, what? Just take the probably out. It's too good to be true. So don't pay nobody. Don't start doing that until you see that. If you have somebody coming up, here again, this is a test question. If somebody comes up, what do? What have I said? Yeah, call me. Call the sheriff's office. Yes, ma'am.
And that, they say they give you the address to a legitimate place. That you can send it to. I mean, that's.
It's very, very good. You have to understand, it's like a telemarketer. They have all day to fine tune what they're doing. Is it a legitimate address? Why? Who said it's a legitimate address?
But if someone would fall for it and send it to that legitimate address, who would get it?
Very good question. Could y'all hear what she said, what she asked? If you sent the payment to a legitimate address, who would get it? A lot of times now, and I'll use a card for this. What they do with cards, what they do with different things, is that it will go to a P.O. box. As soon as it gets to a P.O. box, it's forwarded. Okay?
I wonder, because that's a legitimate address, would the bank or would the hospital give?
No, no.
It's for.
It looks like it's, but they're not sending that money to the hospital. Yeah, it's going to their pocket. Yes, sir.
One that called us, magazine subscription, all right, it only costs $20, all right, and you send it to, had an address and it said suite number so-and-so and so-and-so. Well, never got the magazine, went looking, we ended up in that town, it was in South Carolina, and we went to that place. Well, the suite number happened to be a post office box, all right. The way the post office did it, every box number was called a suite number. And so we thought by suite number that they actually had renting a room somewhere.
Yep. But it wasn't. As soon as that check hit there, it was diverted somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know.
If I can corral you just a minute and hold the conversation down. This is one of our industry rags that we get every week that we pay attention to and read to find out what's going on in the investment world. And this one actually is this week's Exploiting the Elderly. Advisors are on the front lines of battle against the rise in financial abuse targeting seniors. And what this is referring to is being taken advantage of by maybe a caretaker, a family member. Do you see that very often, Randy?
You do, but a lot of times what we will see now is the person that is the caretaker is taking the medicine. William Handy, I don't know if y'all know Big Bill or not, he's our captain over narcotics. It's called an opioid addiction. And it's really becoming a big problem. Everybody, you'll hear a lot about heroin, you'll hear a lot about meth, and it is. It's very tragic and it destroys families. But it's beginning and it's starting because they're taking these opioid pills. And what I mean by opioids, like you may have a pain medicine. And what we're finding is the caregivers are going in, they're taking this medicine, either using it or selling it, you know, and they're making a profit off of it, and then they'll file a report. Well, I don't know what Randy did with his medicine. He must have lost it somewhere. We need to get more. And it's not about really being a caregiver. And it's about more being I'm a caretaker. You know, I'm going to take everything I can from you. So you have to be careful, but it's not only just that. You also are finding that with families. You'll have a younger person that is doing this to the elderly, to the grandma, to the aunts, to the uncles. So be careful, because it is a very lucrative business that they're doing with that. Now, they're also, just like what William's referring to, they'll go in and take a check. Everybody's like, well, I've got my checkbook. Well, that's fine, but what about the check in the middle of your book? They don't go and take check number 1 to 100. They don't take the whole book all the time. They'll go in and take check number 52 that you won't find for months and may not ever find, not realize it. How about your card, your debit cards, where are they at? Who do you have as a power of attorney? Different things like that that they're taking advantage of, and that's how they're getting into the families. That's why it's important, and you'll hear me say this a lot, even if I'm somewhere and we're talking about deadly force. You'll hear me say, you need to talk to an attorney. Get with an attorney, because they're the ones that's going to be able to set it up right for you and have a little bit of protection. Because when it comes down to it, I mean, there's, like I said, this is their job. is to go and steal from you what you've worked your whole life for.
Thank
Thank y'all for having me. I've got some items up here, some pens and different things. I'll hand them out as I go around, but I'll turn it back over to Mr. Moore.
Randy, Sheriff's Department number?
878-3180.
Thank you, Randy.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all.
One of the, the most overlooked part of anybody's financial plan is the estate planning documents that will dispose of your assets, in some ways control your assets. And there are, it's very difficult to describe the pain that you've seen families go through when these documents are not in place. If you do not have a will, the state of North Carolina has written one for you. And it's not necessarily what you want. So we've asked Will Long with Pope McMillan Law Firm, Will is a Statesville native, to talk to us about why it's so important to have these estate planning documents in place.
William is correct insofar as the estates items for each individual a lot of times are overlooked, and the reason for that is that a lot of times people just don't want to deal with a lawyer. And there's nothing wrong with that, but in my role as a lawyer, I get a front row seat for seeing a lot of things go wrong that could have been easily avoided with very minimal planning at a minimal cost. My goal for today is just to get you thinking about some things. The likelihood is that all of you, or most of you, probably have most of these things in place. If you don't, then I hope you'll start thinking about it. I'll open myself up to questions. I'm really trying to address a really broad area in a matter of minutes. So don't hesitate to ask questions. I hope you will. The three questions that I want you to consider are this at a very basic level. First is, when I go, what's going to happen to my stuff? I know that sounds really basic and really simple, but that is where the wills and the trust come into play, because you get the choice to dictate what happens to your stuff if you don't give it away during the course of your lifetime. Entering into a will is a very, very inexpensive and straightforward and basic method to make sure that your family or your friends or your cat or your dog, I've seen, whoever you want your stuff to go to, we want to make sure that it actually goes that way. The reason that you need a will in place in order to accomplish that is because the state of North Carolina has what's called laws of intestate succession, which means if you die without a will, then the clerk of court will administer your estate in accordance with those laws, which say in a very complex way, if you have a spouse, all your stuff goes to your spouse. If you have a child and a spouse, part goes to your spouse, part goes to your child. If you have a spouse that has passed and 2 children, then part of your belongings go here and here and here, and you can imagine how that gets really complex with a larger family environment. It's all too easy to just sit down for, I guess it would take 15 to 30 minutes to give it some very basic thought about whether you want all your stuff to go to your children, whether or not you want all your stuff to go to your grandchildren, if your grandchildren or your children are young, whether you need a trust in place to protect them from abusing those assets. In certain situations, the trust issue gets pretty complicated because most of the time you just don't need it. But there are a world of circumstances out there that could make trust a necessary instrument. It all just depends on individualized circumstance. But again, the question to consider on that front is, what do you want to happen to your stuff? And the will is how you accomplish that. In Iredell County, the clerk of court, for free, allows you to register your will at the clerk for safekeeping. that doesn't cost anything. The reason that's important is because if you do not have the original of your will, it's very hard to get that will carried out in probate. If the clerk of court doesn't have the original, they will presume that you destroyed the original on purpose. So copy is very hard to work with. That's why they offer that free service. It avoids a lot of confusion later on. The second question that you want to consider, so that's the wills and trust piece. The second question that you want to consider and make sure you have in place before anything happens is who's going to make decisions for me if something happens to me and I can't make them for myself. I've seen it 3 times within the past 4 weeks. The situation of a stroke that has left an individual either potentially long-term or, in the best case, short-term, incompetent and unable to carry out very basic decisions. Even if it is a stroke that you anticipate recovering from in the best light, you still need somebody that can make decisions for you on a day-to-day basis to manage your affairs, to keep your bills paid, etc. You accomplish that by having a power of attorney in place, which says that my spouse or my child can make decisions for me, and the North Carolina legislature has a laundry list of authorities that are delegated under a power of attorney. Authority to manage personal checking accounts, for example, is one of them. If you do not have one of those in place, and God forbid something happens, and the stroke is just the example that's fresh on my mind because I've seen it happen within the last 3 weeks multiple times. The best thing that I can do after the fact, because you're not competent to sign a document to delegate power of attorney authority, is start a formal guardianship proceeding, which takes weeks. And it really imposes a burden on not only you, but those that are around you trying to care for you, but don't have the authority to do it. Having a power of attorney in place is incredibly helpful. And God forbid, I hope none of you ever need it, but it's something that's very inexpensive to have in place, and it's something that can go a long way in protecting you after the fact for those disaster-type situations. The third question is, and following along with that, who's going to make decisions for me on a personal level, which is the power of attorney? Who's going to make medical decisions for me if, God forbid, something happens? And that's addressed in the context of a medical power of attorney, which is a standardized North Carolina form document. I can draft it however you want it, but there's a standard one that's very inexpensive. You could probably find it on the internet, I'm sure, but I don't advise you to sign that on your own. It's the North Carolina Advanced Healthcare Directive is what it's called. And it says, in short, if something happens to me and I can't make medical decisions on my own, I want this person, my spouse or my child or my friend, to be able to step into my shoes and make decisions for me. A lot of you may have heard of the living will. The living will is a very similar instrument, but different in a number of ways. The living will is a stated directive that you don't want artificial hydration, nutrition, etc. The medical healthcare power of attorney places the discretion to make that decision in a person who you trust. So the medical healthcare power of attorney covers a lot more of the circumstantial things, as you can imagine. Outside of that, I'm glad to talk about any of the estate features. I really want to know if you guys have any questions to guide it. It's a huge world I can talk about, but if you guys have any questions at all, I'd love to address them. Sure.
Well, I have one about, I'm in a senior, well, and I've been here, but I don't know where it still stands or not, but they told us to write. down what we wanted and put it with our insurance papers or with the business papers or with something, and say that would be all right if we had something wrote down. Say, but be sure and write it and date it and everything. So that's what I did.
Yeah, well, sometimes that works, but it's not concrete. It leaves open a lot of gray area, and the sad reality is that probably your family, when they go to get that paper, it effectively is called a holistic will. You can write your own will. Normally, a will in North Carolina has to be witnessed by 2 independent witnesses and notarized, and there are certain other features that it has to conform with. You can write your own will. North Carolina law recognizes that, and that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's what it.
The disadvantage of that is that it leaves open some gray area in terms of interpretation. So it might make perfect sense to you, but you're not going to be around to explain it. And a lot of times it will lead to some dispute between people who are inheriting things. And times change too, so it may be that you want to revisit that. My advice would be to just get a will drafted and file it for safekeeping at the courthouse. And the reason for that is that you can get somebody to help you write it in a way that won't be misinterpreted later. There's also some things that are normal to put in a will that you won't have thought about when you write your own will. For example, I can put a provision in a will that says, I want my personal representative or my executor, they're called the same thing. Their function is the same, they're called different things. Whoever you want to be in charge of your will, normally the clerk will require them to post a bond, which is an expense and sometimes costly. I can put a provision in a will that waives that, so that you don't have to have a bond in place. That's just an example of a few things that you can put in a will that makes it easier when you're thinking about the process later. As far as splitting the property, what you've done is probably okay. Unless one of your children, God forbid, is in a way, and I'm not saying that they would get greedy, but if one of them gets greedy, it can cause a whole mess.
You're right about that.
Right. So that's the danger. But I hope that answers your question. Living will is just something that doesn't expire by its own terms, but you do want to review it to make sure that the decisions you made back then are still what you want to make now. And that's a good point too, because all of these things, when you make them, are going to be perfect for where you are right now. But life changes, and circumstances change, and siblings get in fights, and children come and go, and these are all things that are unpleasant to think about, but they're realities. So be sure to, if you've got a will in place, review it and make sure it still does what you want to occur.
I was married for almost 20 years and had a living trust made up, and it had the will and the medical power of attorney and all this stuff. And I got divorced in 2007. I only have one child. Is it important for me to have that withdrawn, or does the divorce cancel?
I don't know, unless there's some provision in there that I wouldn't be aware of without seeing it. I don't think that a divorce would terminate the living trust on its own. So that's something you probably need to address. It's amazing. It's so easy to not think about this stuff because it's really unpleasant to think about, if we're being honest. But I've got a very good buddy of mine who's been divorced for 7 years, and all of this stuff is still going to his ex-wife, which they don't get along at all.
Yeah. Actually, if I thought it would go to my ex-husband and he would give it to my daughter. I'm really not worried about it.
Yeah. Well,
but I need to probably
it's something
get
that you can
change.
It's something that you. This is one of those. My whole job is living in a gray area, and it's not fun to be in a gray area. So a large part of what I do is try to avoid gray area, and this is one way where you can cut some gray area out later. And it just means it is a nasty thing to have an estate fight.
Is it useful to go back to the same attorney that drew that up because he has all that
Typically.
stuff in a computer as opposed to getting a new attorney?
Typically,
Okay.
but
Thanks.
it's, it depends on the complexity of it, but if your old attorney, for example, when somebody comes to me to revise an old will, usually I'll do it free of charge because it doesn't take me that much to rearrange a few items. So if you can get that deal with your old attorney, that's what I do. If you want a new attorney, I can do it.
You should give me your card in case I.
There's a saying that, again, after 32 years, you've seen it all, but you never know somebody till you go through probate with them.
Yeah, I've been there, done that, it's not fun.
And where there's a will, there's a family member fighting over it.
Yep.
So I'm going to give you another example that you may not have thought of, and Will touched on that for just a second. I don't require a client to have this, but I highly suggest that they have a power of attorney. Because we've had way too many situations where, as Will has explained, you become incapacitated. You're expected to recover, possibly, but we've had the spouse call and say, Joe is in the hospital, is in a car wreck, I need to get $10,000 out of his IRA. Well, I can't give it to you. Well, I'm his beneficiary. Well, he's not dead. Okay? So as Will said, at that point, then you have to start the conservatorship. It's time-consuming, it's costly, and a general durable power of attorney would have eliminated that immediately. So if you're in a situation, especially if you were single, widowed, you probably ought to have somebody that you can trust. And Will, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a very powerful document, especially if you go ahead and execute that power of attorney now. That person is standing in your shoes and they can walk into the bank and say, I am Sally's power of attorney, I need $10,000. It's not quite that simple, but nonetheless, it's very powerful. So there is, and I'm taking your moment. There is a springing power of attorney that the power of attorney does not take effect until it's necessary, until it's needed. So again, the takeaway from all this is I don't go to an auto mechanic to get brain surgery done. You need to go to somebody who knows what they're doing. So I'm sure Will would be happy to talk to you at any point in time. Will's at Pope McMillan.
Thank you, sir.
And the power of attorney is, if it's something that you're thinking about, it is a double-edged sword. It is a very powerful document. There's some steps that we can take to sort of curb that, but do be aware of that. Yes, sir.
I have a will that is in another state. Is it legal in North Carolina, since I moved here?
It is, but again, is there property in that other state?
No.
Okay. It should be. I'd have to look at the will and see if it conforms to North Carolina law. But my suggestion is always to be, if you're going to be here, let's do it the North Carolina way, because questions at the clerk of court's office get confusing.
Any other questions for Will?
Thank you all.
Thanks, Will. Will's got some cards. If anybody wants to talk to him later, I'm sure he'll talk to you. I see the food is being assembled as we speak. So, okay, so we've talked about how to accumulate funds. We've talked about how to spend those funds. We've talked about how to pass those on correctly. Thank you, Phyllis. I appreciate it. This is our 10th year.
10th year, and we're looking forward to it next year.
We will see you then.